Right. Well, welcome everyone to the very first meeting of the virtual DB2 user group. I'm Trevor Eddles. I'm CEO of a company called iTechEd Limited. We're a mainframe consultancy, analysis and technical authoring organization. We're responsible for the content on the virtual DB2 website, and we produce the newsletters. And that website can be found at itech-ed.com/virtual DB2. We also look after the virtual IMS user group and the virtual CICS user group. Anyway, let's start by running through the agenda for today. Most of the meeting is going to be taken up with the presentation. And today our guest presenter is Craig S. Mullins, President and Principal Consultant at Mullins Consulting, Inc. And he's going to discuss understanding your rolling 4-hour average to tune DB2 and lower mainframe costs. And a copy of the slides from this presentation will be on our website for you to download later today. And we are recording the whole presentation, so there'll be a link to the recording on the website as well much later. And that'll be on the resources page. So following Craig's presentation and any questions you have for him, we'll move on to the latest DB2 news and DB2 related articles. And then I'll give you the dates and times for the next couple of virtual meetings. So that's the plan. I anticipate at this stage, the meeting will last for about an hour and 10 minutes or so. Okay, so as I said, today's guest presenter is Craig Mullins. Craig's President and Principal Consulting of Mullins Consulting, where he focuses on data management strategy and DB2 consulting. He's been named by IBM as a DB2 Gold Consultant and an IBM Champion for Data and AI. He writes the monthly DBA Corner column for Database Trends and Applications magazine. And Craig has over 3 decades of experience in all facets of database systems development. And he's worked with DB2 for ZOS since version 1. Wow, brilliant. So let me thank you very much, Craig, for being here today. Before I hand over to you, can I just say that if anyone has any questions for Craig as we go along, if you just type them into the chat, I'll ask them out loud for Craig to answer as we go along. So let me stop sharing my screen. Let me admit these people who've just turned up. And Craig, thank you very much. If you want to share your screen and start, brilliant.
Well, thank you very much, Trevor. And I think that shares the screen.
Yes.
And you got it. Great.
Yeah.
Okay. So with no further ado, let's move forward and talk a little bit about the rolling 4-hour average and mainframe costs, and a little bit of perspective about what I saw that caused me to put this presentation together. As a DBA, a lot of times we're heads down in the trenches and we're focused on, DB2 and, a lot of other things that are involved with that. And you have this idea of maybe if we can tune some of our DB2 workloads, we can reduce our overall mainframe costs. And it's a good thought, but a lot of times there's no real knowledge about what comprises the mainframe cost and how that's calculated. So this presentation will hopefully clarify that, at least to some degree. Information on me, move on from that, our agenda. And what most organizations are doing, mainframe organizations, is they pay a monthly software bill based on their peak 4-hour usage window, a rolling average of use. But as I mentioned, most IT professionals don't really have a firm understanding of how that works. So even though it's true that an increase in utilization of even a few percentage points can mean a significant increase in that monthly bill, it really depends on when and where that increase happens. So understanding how that rolling 4-hour average is calculated and how that in turn impacts your software bill will give you a better idea of how to tune your systems, tune your DB2 workload with the goal of cost reduction. So, some of the objectives we'll look at is to learn the mechanism behind how you lower that monthly software bill. We'll understand subcapacity pricing a little bit and discuss the rolling 4-hour average. We'll learn the difference between product usage pricing and mainframe subcapacity pricing, and really why it isn't product usage, it's LPAR usage. And then discuss a little bit about DB2 and SQL tuning, given this knowledge that we've acquired on peak consumption and how it impacts your bill. So before digging in, just a quick overview of the terminology I'll use in the presentation and some of the color coding. When I talk about MSUs or IMSU, where MSU is a reference for software billing, I'll talk more about what that is in a minute. And IMSU is the instantaneous consumption of MSU at an individual point in time. It's either IMSU or you may see it as ACT MSU, actual MSU in your performance reports. Anytime I talk about that, that's going to be in red or a reddish color. The rolling 4-hour average, the R4H, is going to be in green. The defined capacity in blue. These are the things that work together to create your monthly software bill. Some of the other terms I'll use: CPC or KEC, a central processor complex, a central electronic complex. That's your mainframe environment. The CPC capacity is the full capacity of that processor environment. And the HMC is the hardware management console. So we'll talk about each of these things as we move through the presentation. And let's start by talking about MIPS and MSUs. We'll talk about what they are and how they're different. And I'm sure you've heard the terms before, but first of all, and historically looking at it, mainframes were measured in terms of MIPS, and MIPS represented the number of instructions that could be processed in a second. And MIPS is an acronym for millions of instructions per second. And it was used as a way to measure the general computing capacity of your mainframe. Yeah, and they were used as a measure for other computing platforms too. So you may see MIPS in the context of a Unix platform, a mid-range platform, even PCs sometimes talk about it in terms of that, but I'm going to focus here in terms of mainframes. And what was done was you'd have a benchmark that gets run that attributes a capacity in MIPS to a particular computer or a particular installation. And the larger number of MIPS that was assigned to the capacity that computer could run, the larger the workload it could process. Now, over time, MIPS no longer translated to an actual millions of instructions per second that a computer could process. And you think about that, why is that? Well, there's differences in the ways that different models of an IBM Z mainframe work, making it difficult somewhat to translate the capacity in MIPS from model to model. And additionally, different types of workloads and settings can impact how MIPS get measured, like the amount and efficiency of memory available or the speed of your IO devices, and the mixture and complexity of the workloads being run all can contribute to kind of make the term MIPS not exactly mean what the acronym stands for. And these days, really, MIPS are kind of an arcane way of comparing CPU capacity across different models. Instead, today we talk about MSUs. And most capacity planners measure mainframe capacity using MSUs. It's kind of a more modern measurement. IBM publishes the capacity rating of every mainframe it sells, in terms of MSUs. And this URL here will take you to that publication if you're interested. And again, as Trevor mentioned, you'll be able to download the slides, and you don't have to write down these web links. You can download the slides and get them later. Okay, so what is an MSU? Well, it's also an acronym, and it stands for Million Service Units. And then the next question becomes, okay, what's a service unit? Originally, it's one service unit related to an actual hardware performance measurement, but that's really not the case anymore. Again, a service unit's kind of an imprecise measurement, and it's determined by IBM specifically to rate the capacity of their mainframe computers. When I say imprecise, the analogy I like to use is tubes of toothpaste. You can get an idea of the capacity of a tube of toothpaste, but they vary in size, right? From travel to larger sizes. You can roughly translate MIPS to MSUs if you want to do that. One MSU is about 8.5 MIPS, but again, that's a rough measurement. And if you're really interested in a little more details on MIPS, MSUs, and the difference between them, I wrote an article on that, and the link is at the bottom of the slide there. But that's a high-level overview of MIPS versus MSUs. And as I noted on that last slide, IBM publishes that MSU chart, and you can go and look at the capacity rating for any of their mainframes in terms of MSUs. And this slide just shows a representative sample of what you will find when you click on that link and go to look at the MSU capacity ratings. Okay, let's move on. And in order to understand mainframe cost, you need to differentiate between licensing and pricing. If you run IBM Z-Series software on your CPC, you have to have a license to run it. And a license for an IBM monthly license charge product is specific to the product and a CPC with a particular serial number. And the license is sold in terms of MSU. So if you're running a product on a 1500 MSU CPC, you have to have a 1500 MSU license that has the serial number of that CPC associated with it. Okay, that's licensing. Now, that's not saying you're paying for 1500 MSUs. The price for a product is what you pay IBM to use the software, and that depends on the pricing metric that's used for that product. And we'll look at some of the pricing metrics in a moment. Don't get worried, we're not going to get bogged down in all the different metrics. We'll just look at a few of them. Additionally, I talked about MLC, or monthly license charge products. And there are different types of products. They're not all MLC. But MLC products are the ones that contribute heavily to the ongoing cost of running your mainframe. And these are products that you pay IBM to use, and you pay monthly for the right to use them. Generally speaking, these are system software products. Some examples of those shown here is ZOS and KIX and IMS and Db2. But there are others. These aren't the only ones. It's generally the middleware, the big hitters. Pricing and the terms and conditions for MLC products are based on the pricing metric you select. That's I'm talking about a pricing metric again. And when you're talking about metrics, they can really be grouped into two categories: full capacity and subcapacity. Okay, under a full capacity metric, all software charges are going to be determined by the full capacity of the CPC where the product runs. Doesn't matter how much you use it, you're paying for the full capacity of the machine where it's licensed. This is not really common for MLC products, but more common for other types of products. IPLA, you may have heard, or Db2 folks here, think about your DBA tools. They're generally going to be priced at a full capacity metric. But that price is usually heavily negotiated and discounted. Okay, so what about a subcapacity metric? In this case, your charges are based on the utilization capacity of the LPARs where the product runs. And that's really what we're going to discuss today, how that works. And I was very specific. I wasn't talking about product pricing. I was talking about LPAR pricing. I'm going to repeat that multiple times because that needs to sink in. Okay, here's the eye chart. And this is showing the IBM software pricing metrics. They're not all shown on here. Here's a bunch of them. And I'm not going to go into any of these in any detail today. Each of them have different requirements, different terms, and it gets negotiated between your company and IBM upfront before you start paying to use the software. If you want more details, this IBM Z software pricing reference guide can help you out. You can dig down in there and see more information about these pricing metrics. For the most part, though, what I'm talking about today are AWSLC and VWLC. Here, variable workload license charges, advanced workload license charges. These are predominantly in use by most organizations, and they're your subcapacity pricing metrics that are based on your monthly usage. Okay, at this point, I like to pause for a moment. Software pricing can be very confusing. And it really doesn't matter if you're talking about IBM or any other software vendor, but talking about IBM, it gets so confusing that sometimes it seems intentionally confusing. And that's why this comic is kind of universally funny, ruining a good system by trying to understand it is what we're going to attempt to do today. And hopefully by the end of today's session, you understand some of these nuances a little bit better, so you won't have your vendors saying, spank yourself and thank them. Anyway, I really need to talk a little bit about tailor fit pricing, because this is what IBM is pushing at the moment, and it's a different pricing metric. It's not exactly this subcapacity metric that I'm going to be discussing through the rest of the presentation, but it is the one that IBM is heavily promoting. So I'm not going to get too in depth discussing how this works, but keep it in mind. And if your shop is using tailor fit pricing, it's going to change the impact of your tuning. How so? Well, in general, with tailor fit pricing, it's designed to look at your overall MSU consumption and then bill a regularly scheduled monthly amount. So every month with tailor fit pricing, you pay the same amount. And it's based on 1/12 of the overall total MSUs that you ran last year, plus any planned increase for the upcoming year. So when you move to tailor fit pricing, what you're saying is, I don't want variable. I don't want this month to pay X and next month to pay X plus Y. I want to pay X, 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 X every month, so it's predictable. Tailor fit pricing does that. And then again, at the end of that year, you'll look at all your MSUs again that you used this year, combine them all together, divide them by 12, plan any increase, and that's what you pay next year, every month. Now, I don't want to get too bogged down in tailor fit pricing, so I'm going to stop at that high level detail, other than to say your tuning differs. When I'm going to talk about tuning today in a subcapacity metric-based environment, then what you tune this month can impact your bill next month. When you tune in a tailor fit pricing environment, what you tune this month will not impact your bill until next year, assuming that every month you're using less because of what you tuned. Hopefully that makes sense now, and if not now, it'll make sense as we move through to discuss the rest of the subcapacity pricing conversation. Okay, with subcapacity, you're charged for usage instead of the full capacity, and it's LPAR usage, not product-based. Actually, it's product-based LPAR capacity usage, a mixture of the two. So with subcapacity pricing, you can purchase hardware capacity for future needs without incurring an immediate increase in your software bill. As you need and use the additional capacity, your software bill gets impacted, it increases, or as you use less, it decreases. This can be particularly helpful for companies with seasonal usage spikes that don't want to pay for the entire capacity, but only what they've used. The bottom line is that you pay based on a rolling 4-hour average of usage, not on the maximum capacity. We're going to define how this works. Many organizations already use this subcapacity pricing. If you don't, you need to take a look at this planning for subcapacity manual. It'll walk you through it. If you do use it and you don't understand really how it works, this is another good resource that you can download and keep in your arsenal. For now, though, I'm going to give you a nice overview of the basics that are kind of included in that manual. And there are 4 basic things you need to understand with subcapacity pricing. That's the rolling 4-hour average, defined capacity settings, your instantaneous MSU consumption, and the SCRT, or the subcapacity reporting tool. We're going to take a look at each of them right now, and we'll start with the rolling 4-hour average, or the R4H. This represents the average consumption in MSUs for an LPAR during the last 4 hours. It's an average of the last 48 IMSU usage metrics, which are being, your system's monitoring that, and you can see this in RMF, you can see this information, the SMF data that's being collected, and this is taken every 5 minutes. So as you can see from the graph at the bottom of the page, the green line, that's tracking the rolling 4-hour average of your IMSU consumption over time. And that's the reddish up and down arrows here, or lines. They represent IMSU usage. And as they go up, the rolling 4-hour average goes up. As they go down, the rolling 4-hour average starts to go down. So this R4H is based on your actual instantaneous MSU usage. Take a look at this a little deeper. Every 5 minutes, IMSU consumption is measured. So the rolling 4-hour average gets calculated based on the most recent past 48 IMSU metrics that have been gathered. So here we see this block of IMSU metrics. The first is 125, the second 130, and so on, all the way down to the last metric, in this case, the 48. Yeah, they don't all fit on the screen, but there's 48 there assumed, and that's 119. So all of these get summed up to figure out what the average consumption is over the past 4 hours. Now assume 5 minutes have elapsed, and we get a new IMSU metric of 127. This gets added to the top of the queue, and the last metric on the list, the 119, gets removed. Then a new rolling 4-hour average is calculated using that updated list, this one, of your 48 most recent instantaneous MSU measurements. And as you would expect, the new rolling 4-hour average will be a bit higher, because we removed 119, we added 127. 119 is a lower consumption than 127. So the average inches up a little. Okay, so now we know how the rolling 4-hour average gets calculated, but how does that translate into what you get billed? All right, we'll look at that. Your variable and advanced workload license charging are not product usage pricing, but a hybrid. I know I've said that before. I'm probably going to say it again. The rolling 4-hour average that was calculated based on the IMSU usage is done by LPAR, not by product. So there's nothing out there that's saying, you know, this is your DB2 usage. It's saying this is your LPAR usages. Assume you have 3 LPARs like we've shown here. Each month, rolling 4-hour averages get calculated for each qualified product each hour for each LPAR for the month. So a 30-day month has 720 hours, 24 hours times 30, 720 buckets. So you see here at the bottom of the screen, these 3 LPARs, along with the rolling 4-hour average for each of these 720 hours we have in the month. Okay. Now we also have different monthly license charge products in each of these LPARs. So assume we're set up like we're shown here, where LPAR 1, all 3 LPARs have ZOS in it. LPAR 1 also has DB2 and MQ. LPAR 2 kicks DB2 and COBOL. LPAR 3 kicks IMS and COBOL. Now this is where some folks get confused. Sub-capacity pricing is not product usage, but LPAR usage-based pricing. The products get charged based on the peak period of the sum of the rolling 4-hour averages for the LPARs where they run. So in other words, look at the bottom of this slide. ZOS gets charged for the cumulative peaks of LPAR 1, 2, and 3. Kicks, LPAR 2 and 3. DB2, LPAR 1 and 2. MQ, just for LPAR 1. COBOL, LPAR 2 and 3. IMS, LPAR 3. There's no running total within this MSU consumption of DB2 or IMS or ZOS or any particular product. It's charged on the peak MSU consumption of the LPARs in which they run. Okay. The next slide should help clear this up a bit. At the top of this slide, you see the 3 LPARs and the 720 buckets for the rolling 4-hour average calculation for the month. And at the bottom, we see the various combination of LPARs that have multiple products. So ZOS is LPAR 1, 2, and 3, DB2 LPAR 1 and 2, Kicks and COBOL LPAR 2 and 3. And then remember, MQ and IMS are only in a single LPAR. So the top of the graph gets filled out with the rolling 4-hour calculations in each of the buckets. The peak for the month is highlighted in bold and underlined. So for LPAR 1, it's 60. For LPAR 2, it's 80. For LPAR 3, it's 47. Okay, so let's fill in the bottom of the graph. And we'll start with the combination of LPARs 1, 2, and 3. That first bucket is filled in as the sum for the first hour, 60 plus 70 plus 40. That's 170. Okay, so we see what we're doing here. Let's fill in the rest of this line. Now we determine what the peak is for the sum rolling 4-hour numbers for that particular LPAR. The highest value along this row is 175. So that is the aggregate peak for ZOS running in all 3 LPARs for that month. Take note that we do not take the individual peaks to determine the aggregate peak. So we don't go 60, 80, 47. Instead, we only sum up what we've got in each of these columns. So you fill in the next line by summing up the peak rolling 4-hour averages for LPAR 1 and 2. This is your DB2 numbers. Here we see 135 is the number there. And then we fill in the line for LPAR 2 and 3. This is your kicks and your COBOL number. and with a peak here is out here at 122. So this is what's going on behind the scenes to figure out how your product billing happens. So it's, again, we have no record of exactly what Db2 is consuming. It's Db2 ran in these two LPARs, LPAR 1 and LPAR 2, and the peak of the usage for that LPAR happened here at 135. And it doesn't matter if, maybe all the other things running in LPAR 2, your ZOS and your Kix was consuming more resources than Db2. They're all paying for the same consumption. Okay, so the billable MSU for each product is the peak rolling 4-hour average for the LPAR or grouping of LPARs where the product ran. So this is the rolling 4-hour average in a nutshell. But it's only the first of the 4 components that you need to know to understand how this all works out. You also need to know a little bit about defined capacity, or the DC. This is a setting you can use to set up soft capping. I don't want to get too down in the weeds with this, but you can artificially set a number for each LPAR that will be used to control costs by capping usage when it gets exceeded. You set that defined capacity number in the HMC, or the hardware management console, for each LPAR. You do not have to set a DC. If you leave it 0, you don't have soft capping, and only the rolling 4-hour average is used. But if you do set up a DC, then WLM is going to monitor your rolling 4-hour average to ensure that it's less than or equal to the defined capacity. If the rolling 4-hour average exceeds the defined capacity, then Prism is going to cap your IMSU usage at that defined capacity amount until the rolling 4-hour average goes back down below the defined capacity setting. So, okay, that's a high level of how a defined capacity works. And, I'm not talking, workload manager, Prism do a lot more than this, but that's very high level. Here's how it gets set, the hardware management console. Very few people have access to this. The system programmer is going to have access to it. A capacity planner, maybe. DBAs, you're not going to see this. And it's that way because if you set something up here wrong, it can have a significant impact on the system. Here I've circled, where you set that setting. In this case, it's both 0, so there is no defined capacity set. But you need to know if you've got defined capacity set, that can have an impact on things. Okay, the next component is IMSU, your instantaneous MSU usage. And we've talked a lot about it already, in terms of rolling 4-hour average. So we're not going to go into a lot of detail here, just, a quick slide showing your workload may look like this, may not. This is, similar to what a lot of folks' workload looks like. 8 o'clock, your online starts ramping up, peaking out around 10, lunchtime it drops, got to peak again in the afternoon. Batch starts up and it goes up again during batch over a period of time till it goes down again and starts the process all again tomorrow. So, and it, may look the same, may look different depending upon what your weekly and daily workload looks like. Finally, the SCRT. That's the sub-capacity reporting tool. And it's a no-charge tool that you get from IBM, and you have to use it to report the required license capacity for your sub-capacity eligible products. It's going to record and calculate the usage and MSUs of each sub-capacity eligible product. It cross-references LPAR utilization and product execution by LPAR to show you the peak rolling 4-hour average utilization. So, we walked through an example of how that gets calculated earlier. This is the tool that's gathering those metrics to report all that. Okay. There are multiple components of the SCRT, I'm going to briefly look at 3 of them: the customer information section, the tool information section, and the product details. Now, again, as a DBA, you may never have seen an SCRT, but if you have MLC products and subcapacity pricing, it is being generated, and you can get your capacity folks to show you a copy of it, and it's helpful to pinpoint where your peaks are so that you can use them to tune. It's
Craig, sorry to
yes.
interrupt. I have a question from Guy Genkatis, I think. Sorry about that. He says, our SCRT reports show CPU by product, COS, Kicks, Db2, IMS, etc. Are these provided because we are under a different contract than is being covered? Presentation says MSUs are collected at LPAR level, not at a product level. We have product MSUs for HMA stats. Why?
Okay. Yeah, actually, when I show you the product detail section of the SCRT report, I bet it looks familiar. Yes, the SCRT is going to break down by product the peak utilization for the month for your rolling 4-hour average, product by product. But again, those numbers are based on the collection methodology that I just ran through by LPAR. So you will see a metric that's your peak rolling 4-hour average utilization in your SCRT report for DB2, for Kicks, for IMS, for ZOS. But those numbers, you can't just say that's what the actual usage of DB2 is. That's the actual usage of the LPARs where DB2 is installed is. So this is the confusing thing that everybody who first comes to this, or even has been looking at these for years, doesn't understand. It is the LPARs that are that's having information collected. And the SCRT is going to report product by product the information it collected based on those LPARs. So when I was showing you those buckets, and for ZOS, it was the information for all 3 LPARs. It's not, that number is the LPAR utilization peak for each of those 3 LPARs, not just what the operating system is doing, or not just what DB2 is doing. It's everything in that LPAR. If, when I get to the product detail section here, you still have something that looks different or you're confused, ask again, okay? But this should clear it up.
Great, thanks.
Sure. So there's customer information, tool information, and product detail. Let's quickly look at the customer information. This is pretty straightforward. You know, who it is, what your site is, what your machine rated capacity is, and so on. There is a customer comment section that you can enter before you submit your reports to IBM. Can be used to explain anomalies. Sometimes maybe you had a bug that caused a loop, consumed a lot of CPU for the month. You can say, hey, IBM, we had this issue, and they'll take it into account and reduce your bill. Now, you can't do that all the time. If you're constantly having that bug, you got to fix it. But you know, if you've got one thing that's an anomaly or an outlier, keep that in mind and take advantage of that. So you've got this customer section that you've got to submit. Then there's the tool information, and this is what SCRT is using to gather information. And quickly, it makes sure that you've collected sufficient metrics. In this case, we haven't. You have to collect 95% of the possible metrics that could have been collected for the month or higher. If you collect lower, you've got to tell them why and work through that. So you got to make sure you're collecting these SMF type 70 and 89 subtypes 1 and 2 records in order for the SCRT to calculate the information correctly. And we'll talk more about these records in a minute. This percent data collected is, again, I said it has to be 95% or higher. And if it isn't, then you've got to justify why you've got that low data collection. That placeholder to justify only shows up when that number is less than 95%. Okay. Then this is the part you're probably talking about, the product detail section of the SCRT, the P5 section. Here we see all the products that are contributing to your monthly license charge bill. And what the SCRT is reporting is the peak rolling 4-hour average for each product based on the peak of the LPAR when that occurred, LPAR or LPARs. And that's what's used to calculate your usage bill. So again, here, and again, okay, this is a little bit older. We've got Db2 for ZOS. Probably need to get a more recent product detail, but it's basically the same today as it was then. See, we've got Db2 running, and it's in all three of these LPARs. We see LPAR D is 24, LPAR P is 294, LPAR W is 4. This is the peak at that point in time for 322 MSU rolling 4-hour average. This is the date and time when that occurred. Okay, so you can see, for example, COBOL has 101 as its peak. It's only in one LPAR though. That translates to here 101. But in no instance do we have something that is less than an LPAR utilization. So it's not like, well, ZOS was running in LPAR D on February 27th at 6 a.m. and it consumed 20 MSUs of the 24 that the entire LPAR consumed. Doesn't matter, not recorded, not collected. It's what the LPAR consumed, not what the product consumed. So that's what these numbers are showing you. LPAR utilization, track back to the product based on that grid I was showing you and how the numbers dumped down into those grids. Hopefully that clarifies things. Now, what gets reported here? Each hour, the SCRT compares the 4-hour rolling average to the defined capacity, if it's set, and chooses the lower of the two. That value becomes the utilization value for that hour. If defined capacity isn't set, the maximum rolling 4-hour average capacity is used. So really what you need to know is this. If the rolling 4-hour average is less than the defined capacity, the rolling 4-hour average is used. If the rolling 4-hour average is greater than defined capacity, then the defined capacity is used. If the defined capacity is not set, rolling 4-hour average is used. Each month, you run the SCRT and it calculates your peak rolling 4-hour average from the second day of the month to the first day of the following month. They're calculated for each MLC product, each hour, for each LPAR for the month. And remember our graph. Here's another look at that, similar graph. The numbers here were calculated exactly as we highlighted earlier. So each LPAR utilization tracked down to the actual products give us what the SCRT reports. Okay, so it's important to understand that. LPAR utilization, not product utilization. LPAR utilization translated to the products based on the LPAR where the product ran. LPAR or LPARs. What about those SMF records? What are they tracking? The SMF 70 type 1 is your CPU activity. This is your MSU usage, your instantaneous IMSU. What about SMF 89, subtype 1 and 2? Subtype 1 reports when a product is started. Subtype 2 reports when it is stopped. So if a peak occurs when a product is not operational, that product gets excluded from that particular peak. and any other peak that occurs when the product is not operational. Okay, so this is to your advantage. And it only happens for products that cut SMF89 records. And again, not all of them do. If your product doesn't cut an SMF89 record, then the SCRT just assumes it's always operational. But if it does, and it finds a peak, then when we go and fill out those boxes here, that product will not take into account that specific metric if it is not operational when the metric was cut. So keep that in mind, because that's helpful for us potentially when we tune. So let's review with some pictures here. Remember the soft capping rule. When the rolling 4-hour average is greater than the defined capacity, the LPAR is capped, and that means the IMSU consumption won't be able to exceed the defined capacity. This is what we see in these blocked areas here, where the defined capacity caps our IMSU usage. The rolling 4-hour average can exceed it, but until it does, the IMSU usage will be curtailed. So if we look at an example, here's the IMSU usage chart that we had earlier with the activity spread throughout the day. And then we add in the rolling 4-hour average. That gets calculated from all these IMSU metrics. And then we add a defined capacity, the blue bar here. We set that at 90 MSUs, right around here. Causes capping to happen when the rolling 4-hour average goes above that. That happens like around 12 noon here. And then again, around 6. So we see the defined capacity working there. IMSU, defined capacity, rolling 4-hour average, all working together. So what can we conclude here? Well, can be confusing, but subcapacity pricing can save you money. There are a lot more nuances to this than I can cover in an introductory presentation, things like on-off capacity on demand or group capacity licensing. I'm not going to touch on them today, but it is possible to impact the bill for multiple products by reducing the rolling 4-hour average for a single LPAR. Subcapacity pricing charges by LPAR. So if the rolling 4-hour average for an LPAR decreases, it's possible that the bill for every product in that LPAR goes down, and intelligent Db2 tuning can be helpful. What about some tactics? Remember that SMF89 record I talked about. It indicates when the product's up and running and when it's down and not running. So when you're not using software, if at all possible, shut it down so you don't get charged if the peak occurs when that software isn't really running. So let's say your peak rolling 4-hour average happens during your batch cycle between midnight and 4 a.m. Furthermore, let's say that Kix isn't active between the hours of 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. Think about taking Kix down before midnight and up again after 4 a.m. This is where your peak regularly occurs, between midnight and 4. If Kix isn't active then, and the peak happens then, Kix won't be billed for that peak because it's not active. I'm not saying it's always feasible. It's something to keep in mind. You have to plan, make sure you have the time and the methodology to start and stop products that way. Understand where your peaks are and attack the peaks. The SCRT reports the peak for each LPAR as well as the next highest peak usage time. When Db2 contributes to the peak, use Db2 tuning techniques to reduce that consumption. You do not have to focus on the absolute peak hour. Remember, it's a rolling 4-hour average. So anything running at the peak hour and the trailing 4 hours is fair game to reduce that cost. When you reduce one peak, go to the report, find the next peak, and attack that one. Another thing I want to mention here is sometimes when we tune, we think we're tuning to reduce cost. And if we're tuning in an area where the peak doesn't happen, again, it's happening, say, batch between 12 and 4 a.m., but we tune an online transaction at 2 p.m. I'm not saying tuning that transaction is a bad thing. What I am saying is tuning that transaction isn't going to reduce your MLC software cost, your monthly cost. Also, if your peak is happening between 12 and 4, if you're adding new workload, try not to put it in between 12 and 4, put it somewhere else, and it can run for free. It's not going to impact that peak. So keep your peaks in mind. Another reason why your DBAs should have access to your SCRTs. Again, think outside the box. You're charged for each product based on the LPARs where the product runs. You may be able to tune Db2 and reduce the cost of other products that run in the same LPARs, ZOS, Kix, IMS, COBOL, whatever. On the other hand, you may be able to tune non-Db2 usage and reduce the cost of Db2. This is based on something that I actually encountered as a consultant. Say you have a batch vSAM program and it takes up a lot of resources and it's during your monthly peak. Tuning that program to be more efficient can reduce your peak rolling 4-hour average and reduce the cost of all the products running in that LPAR. In this case, we repro'd a vSAM file that hadn't been reorganized in decades, and we eliminated the CI and CA splits, had better performance, reduced the peak, and it reduced DB2 costs, even though that particular job had nothing to do with DB2. All right, translating this to your tuning efforts. If your monthly peak is in the batch window, keeping these things in mind. Are you meeting your batch SLAs? What can you do to reduce MSU consumption during batch processing? Maybe your SLA is, it has to run between 10 and 6, but your peak is between 12 and 4. Is there anything you can do to spread that out a little bit more so that some of it runs before 12, some of it runs after 4? Look at other things, your commit processing, your concurrency unlocking, your SQL tuning, the things that are your typical culprits when it comes to batch tuning. What if your monthly peak is during your transaction processing during the day? Well, then look at your how you optimize your transactions. Is the workload appropriate for your systems? Have you tuned your DBAS? Consider what can be done to reduce your MSU consumption, Kix tuning, RDO specs, tuning your SQL, on and on, your typical tuning type efforts. Your tactics, tune your SQL in the application. That's the first thing to look at. Most of your experts are going to agree that this is where the bulk of your bang for the buck comes with tuning. As high as 70 to 80% of your performance problems fall into the SQL and application. Yes, there's other options, your database, your subsystem, your environment, your distributed and allied agents. So, look at all of those things as part of tuning, and, it could then branch off into another presentation talking all about DB2 tuning here. But I really wanted to explain tuning from a cost perspective to get here. When we look at tuning, look at your heaviest resource consuming SQL during the peaks, and then identify your tuning opportunities. Can you index? Can you eliminate scans? Can you take work out of the program and put it into the SQL? Can you avoid sorting? Can you move to stage 1 in indexable predicates? Can you reduce the implications of locking? Look at your unit of work, look at your lock avoidance setting. How frequently are you committing? What isolation level are you using? Review your cursor settings. I find multi-row fetch is something that very few shops really have dug in and implemented in any large amount, but it's something that can reduce the overall cost of your COBOL program. So all these things can be taken into account to reduce the cost of your SQL, but again, find them during your peaks if you want to have an impact on your monthly cost. Also, be aware of the whack-a-mole effect. In this article here I wrote, you can find it and discuss this in a little more detail, but I think you know what I'm talking about. There's that old arcade game, it's called whack-a-mole, and you get a mallet and you whack the moles that show up out of the holes on the board. You hit one mole, another pops up, and you have to hit that mole, another and another. And if you tune your mainframe workload for cost savings, it's probably going to have a similar effect. Think about it. You identify a peak. Assume we find programs to tune that ran during that peak 4-hour window, and you tune them to reduce MSU usage and maybe even reduce it significantly. What happens to the next bill? Assuming subcapacity pricing, not tailor fit, the next SCRT report is going to identify the next highest peaks for the combination of products and LPARs that you're using. And that means you're going to likely have to tune a different set of peak times to attack. But will you have saved any money? Well, it's going to depend on the specific mix of workloads you have. Let's say you saved a significant amount on your tuning effort, and maybe we reduced MSU users from the rolling 4-hour average from 98 to 88 during that time frame. Did we save 10 MSUs on our bill? Probably not. That SCRT is going to identify the next peak, which may be at a completely different date and time. So maybe the next day or the next hour, you consume 97 MSUs across those 3 LPARs. So even though you went from 98 to 88 during your peak, your next peak was 97. So all you saved was 1 MSU by whacking that first mole. This other one has popped up. So your tuning efforts is this constant game of whack-a-mole. Again, depends on your shop, depends on the workloads that you run, but keep that in mind. So to sum up, consider cost reduction along with performance improvement by taking your peak rolling 4-hour average into account. That means getting access to the SCRT. Find the big resource consumers in your peak rolling 4-hour average window, and then look for ways to minimize resource consumption during that window. So find that 4 hours where that peak got calculated, find the programs that ran there, look to tune those. SQL tuning, multi-row fetch, your unit of work processing, your locking, and be proactive about it. Find tuning opportunities, analyze your workloads, convert your SQL and tune, and move forward. That's about all I can cover in an hour here. I do want to briefly mention my books. Db2 Developer's Guide and the Database Administration book are still available and out there. I've got this relatively newer book, A Guide to Db2 Performance for Application Developers. This is for ZOS and LUW, and it's focused specifically on application developers, how they can write better application code. And I've also got some of these short books that are out on Amazon. You can get them either as a Kindle book or a print book, generally less than 100 pages, generally less than $10. You learn about database views, learn about the Tau of DB2, a framework for database design reviews, and regulatory compliance with data and database systems. Want to thank you for your time. Here's my contact information. And again, we'll make the presentation available to you in PDF.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Craig. That was just full of information. And I thought I knew a lot of that before you started talking. Yeah, if anyone's got any questions now, if you can pop it into the chat, or otherwise Craig's put his email address on screen. You can jot that down or get it off the PDF when it becomes available and send it to him. Just got one comment for you, Craig, that remember Guy Jankatis had a question earlier? Well, he's now said, the explanation is a bit of a surprise. I assumed that product CPU reporting was based upon product CPU usage. My bad. The explanation sounds reasonable. Sorry, I've got something in the way. Yeah, assuming does not always work. Thanks for the explanation.
Right. And I would just add, don't feel bad about it. Everybody, when they first hear this, has a similar reaction. I remember when I first dug into it to learn it, I had the same reaction. Surprise.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got another comment from Snacko Mabaltha. Sorry if I've not got your name quite right. Who says thanks? So, if we haven't got any more questions coming in, I will move on. And I will say thank you very much, Craig. That was really informative, really useful. And yeah, that really does give a good idea as to why or how you should be doing your tuning to actually make the most or make the least, is it, of those things so that you're hitting it at the right level. Yeah, here we are. We've got another one saying, thanks a lot, Craig, was really insightful. So that's great. Because we're a virtual user group, please assume that you're now getting a virtual round of applause from all the attendees. So thanks very much. Yeah, great presentation. Especially enjoyed the Dilbert comic strip. And someone's asking, where can we find this presentation? I will put a copy on our website. So that's itech-ed.com/virtual DB2. But I'll make sure everyone gets hold of that link. Okay, let's go back to sharing my screen. Okay, yeah. So thanks, Craig. Brilliant stuff. Moving on, news. I haven't actually got hold of any DB2 news. When I used to do the little DB2 update publication, lots of companies were releasing new versions or new releases of DB2 products, but nowadays people seem less keen to publicize that. I mean, a lot of people are on sort of rolling 4-monthly updates and don't make a big thing about it. But articles, we've got quite a few articles that have been published recently. Taking advantage of the wealth of information in your DB2 logs. That was in Enterprise Tech Journal, and that was written by, Craig Mullins, yes. We've got navigating directly between Kik's task history and DB2 thread history. That was by Paul Kenny and Mick Harris, and that's actually on the IBM Z and Linux One community website. That was from November. Articles, Types of Database Recovery, Part 1 by Craig Mullins on the DBTA website. That was in October. And on the Planet Mainframe site, we've got DB2 for ZOS, Separate Security, and SecAdam, and that's by Robert Cattrall. So that was in September.
Just to break in quickly there, Trevor, part 2 of that database recovery was the next month on database trends. So both of the parts are out there now.
Okay, well, thanks for adding that. Whoops. So coming soon, as I said, this is our very first meeting. We've got at least 2 more planned. So dates for your diary, 28th of March and 23rd of May. And on the 28th of March, we've got Chad Reiber, Principal Software Consultant at BMC. He's going to be talking about DB2 ZEOS recovery, how best practices have changed to address new threats. And then in May, we've got Canvas Botha, who you may have heard of. He's a bit of a DB2 whiz, and he's going to be talking about writing high-performance SQL statements. Just to let you know that we are all over social media. So on Facebook, we've got a page, which is facebook.com/virtualdb2. We've also got a Twitter feed, which is twitter.com/virtualdb2. And we've also got a group on LinkedIn. You can join those. You can follow us on the page. You can follow us on Twitter. If you are going to do any virtual media posting about today's session, then can you use hashtag virtualdb2, and that'll get back to us easily. And the reason I've got a YouTube picture there is because this whole session is being recorded, and later today, certainly by first thing tomorrow morning, a recording of today's presentation will be sitting there on YouTube, and the link to that will be on our website. But it'll also be in the newsletter that goes out at the beginning of next month. So that's all for this meeting of the virtual DB2 user group. Can I thank you all for attending? Thanks to Planet Mainframe and IntelliMagic for sponsoring our user group. And of course, I'd particularly like to thank Craig Mullins for his presentation. So that's it. Thank you all very much. And I look forward to seeing you all on the 28th of March and hope you'll be joining us for that meeting. So thank you and goodbye.